So I'm sure you all have heard a lot about this election cycle. It kind of is blanketing absolutely everything that's happening in the media. I think I figured something out. I think I figured out how we can hijack this election. But to do that, I'm going to need all of your help, okay? So I'm going to need you to come along with me on this journey together so we can hijack this election. Are you in? Great, I feel you. Wonderful. So to do this, what I've realized is our strategy, our platform doesn't even matter. It's not even so much about our ideas. We already have on our side enough support that if we can just remove some of the voters on the other side, that we can win. So the entire strategy here is just to stop people from voting. And if we can do that, we can win. So how do we do that? How do we stop people from voting? So in order to do that, it's going to require us to start really young. I want to be able to stop people from voting from the second that they have the opportunity. So how do we do that? Education, or rather, a lack of education. See, because we already have some friends in the government, we can actually design our schools to not teach voting at all. Let's just completely remove civic education from the curriculum entirely. And you know what? That's going to stop the youth, the people who are 18, seniors in high school. It's going to stop them from voting. Then they're going to get to college, and once they're in college, they're not going to be required to learn about voting then. And so, great. So we've stopped that entire voting block from ever learning anything about voting and about how to engage in the process. So wonderful. We're off to a great start. All these young people are not going to vote. Wonderful. Now, how else can we stop people from voting? Let's create divides in our society. Rather than really rallying and organizing around our ideas and using logic and reason to push forward what we believe in, why don't we instead just cause divisions on the other side? If we have a bunch of people fighting with each other over here, and they're all reusing all their energy and getting exhausted just arguing with one another, we can then bring together our voters and our support and just march right along and just go past that entirely. We can also just spew out a lot of disinformation. You know, these days we can just buy some ads online, blatantly lie to the public on a massive scale, completely misinform them about what's actually happening, and through disinformation, we can create even more divides on that side and have those people all fighting with each other. So great, they're all running a mess, and you know what? People love polls. So let's make sure that as we're creating these divisions, we promote polls as much as possible. And in all of these polls, you know what we have to say? We're going to say, you know what, it's like 95% likely that this candidate is going to win. It's 99% likely. You don't even have to show up. It's going to happen. And by pushing that and emphasizing that, then what we're going to see is more and more people aren't going to show up, and we're going to cause all those divides. Great, so we're off to a great start. We've caused all these divides, we've got all this misinformation going out there, and we have all these polls that are kind of getting people not even interested in going out to vote. And so now we have all these people out here, right? We have the purple team, we have the orange team. How do we decide who's going to represent these people? Right, if you're looking at this, you can see that 40% of these people are team purple. 60% of the people are team orange. So you would imagine that in a democracy, in a typical democratic setting, how we were all kind of taught based on our education system that we put into our high schools earlier on, that it's equal. One vote equals one vote, right? We're going to, of course, see that level of representation in the government. You would assume that just as there is in this population, that 40% of the representatives would, that if there were categories, that if we were to create these blocks representing each group, that there would be complete representation in this type of scenario, where you're going to see 40% of the representatives representing Team Purple and 60% of the representatives representing Team Orange. But if we take what we're assuming the process is away, and we put on our scheming hats, because we're conspiring here, we're all in this in cahoots to win this election, if we draw the lines like this instead, you can see now that in every one of these blocks that we are going to be represented by Team Orange. So we have just completely erased Team Purple from having any sort of representation in this system. And this, my friends, is called gerrymandering. We have just gerrymandered the system and completely taken advantage of this electorate and this democracy so that we can push our own self-interests. And now, if we look at that again and we look at all these voters, that's a lot of people. Maybe there's a way we can reduce the number of people that are actually able to vote on election day. So, of course, before you go and vote, you have to register and vote. Number one, make sure you register to vote. But when you vote, when you register to vote, there's going to be an entire voter roll that's going to have every single person who's registered to vote. Now, what if there was a way that we could purge the voter rolls and we could just take some people off of that list? Well, great, let's do that. Let's make up whatever reason there is. We can say, oh, we think people moved, maybe these dates are really old. Let's just take all these people off of the list, not notify any of them, and just keep on moving forward. So great, we're off to a wonderful start. We've been running this great campaign leading us all the way through to election day. We have people that are young not turning out to vote. We've taken all these people off of the voter rolls. This is great. And it brings us to election day, the day we've all been waiting for. Now, what's great about this day is, election day, it's on a Tuesday. It's always on a Tuesday. And you know what's so good about that for us? It means that all these working people going out 9 to 5, your normal American, is probably not going to be able to vote. So that's great for us. Perfect. The system is designed so all these people can go out and vote. And you know what? Let's make sure that on election day, that we make sure that the time frame that people can actually vote in is as little as possible. If people are at work 9 to 5, let's make that when the polling stations are open. So that way, they'll never be able to get out. There's no regulations on this, not on a national level. And you know what? Let's make sure that those polling places are as far away as possible from where people live. If they're in a rural area, in a rural community, and they have to go out and drive 10, 20, 30 miles one way, maybe they're going to work 20 miles the other direction, they're not going to be able to get there. That'll stop all of them from voting. And let's also make sure we put in as few polling places as possible. The less polling places there are, the longer lines there are going to be. And because there's going to be all these long lines, all those people, those same working people, how on earth are they ever going to be able to wait? They got a life to live, they got dinner to cook, they got kids, they got a whole situation. So this is going to stop a lot of them. So wonderful. Now we have these long lines really stopping people from going and getting to their actual ballot boxes and voting. Let's also make sure that we only let people in who have voting IDs. It's very illegal to charge people money to vote, a poll tax. But if we could disguise a fee in some other way, perhaps through a voting ID, which we know as the government is going to cost people a whole bunch of money to get, money that not everyone has, not everybody needs a state-issued ID for a driver's license, for example, we can stop all those people from being able to vote in a convenient way. We can also stop young people, for example, college students who are living in one state, going to another state, and have different addresses from where they're living now in college and where they came from, because they're not going to have those IDs. So great. All these people are not being able to vote. And you know what? Let's make sure we don't fund these polling places. Let's make sure that we really make sure that the people who are working there, they're not lawyers, they're not even necessarily experts in elections. Let's make sure they have no idea what's actually happening and give them so little money and training that they're not well equipped to deal with the situation, and all these voters are angry and upset, and the lines are getting longer, and some people are just going to be turned away out of sheer confusion and ignorance for what the actual procedures are. Let's also make sure that when they're voting, the ballots are designed to be incredibly confusing, right? If you look here and you see that, we have Team Orange, Team Purple, Team Apple, and if, you were to read down a column as a normal person would, you would assume that these things would be 1, 2, 3. But the boxes are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And on the other side, we got Team Cherry, Team Mango. I've never even heard of what those teams are. But, if you're filling this out quickly or you don't quite understand how confusing this is, look at where that arrow is for Team Purple. It doesn't even properly align with the box. So if someone's trying to vote for Team Purple, they might end up voting for Team Cherry instead, and all of those votes for those people who got through all those obstacles and actually were able to cast a ballot is invalidated because they weren't able to express who it was that they were actually trying to vote for. And let's make sure those ballots are not even on paper. Let's put them in voting machines. And you know what voting machines is usually a good word for? Really, really awful computer. Like if you've ever used an electronic voting system, you know how finicky and how jank these computers are. I wouldn't even let my grandma use this. They're so outdated. And so that'll cause all sorts of other confusion. People aren't going to know how to click. The computers aren't even going to be able to necessarily register all of their votes accurately. And look at that. We won the election. Guys, I don't know who to thank first. So just like that, through these series of misinformation campaigns, preventing educational access, by having long lines, by having voting hours be exactly when people are at work, having narrow windows for when people can get to the election, we have prevented so many people from voting, and we won the election. And you know what's most interesting about this? I never even told you one single one of my policy ideas. Didn't even matter what my thoughts were and what my campaign was about. I could have been anybody. In fact, we all just did this together in this room. And so, for me, looking at the system, you know, growing up, I have to say I never knew that all of this was happening. When I was talking about that lack of information in high schools, I'm sure you were never informed of the pure grandeur of the disinformation and the lack of education on this. For me, I grew up as an environmentalist. I've always worked in climate change and sustainability. I thought, you know what, if I learn the best science, and I do the best research, and I can write the best policy, this should be easy, right? Climate change is such a huge issue that affects all of us globally. It affects droughts, it affects our cropland, it affects our economy, it affects social justice, it affects so many aspects of society. Of course we would want to address it. And what I found was that that wasn't the case. That there have been so many delays in being able to create any sort of policy on climate change. And even right now, when 2/3 of people, according to a recent Pew study, agree that the government is not doing enough on climate change, the government is still not taking action. And so we're seeing this fundamental disconnect between public policy and public opinion. And when this country is supposed to be run by the public, that's an issue. And so what do? How do we fix it? Well, number one, vote. I hope you got that by now. It's so fundamental that we vote. And you know how I know voting is so important? If voting wasn't so important, there would not be all of these different campaigns preventing you from being able to go out and cast your ballot, right? And the reality is that, you know, your boss votes, your boss's boss votes, your landlord votes, all the politicians around you vote, all these people who are making decisions about your life, they all vote. And so if you're not voting, your voice is not being heard. If you are not representing yourself, don't expect anybody else to be able to represent you as well as you can represent your own experiences. So it's so fundamental that we vote. But more than just voting, it's important that we organize around voting. That if there are these incredible campaigns designed to stop you from voting, there needs to be just as much effort to get you out to vote. And how does that happen? It's not from some savior who's going to come up on a stage and give you all the answers. It comes from you in your own communities, reaching out, bringing a +1 to the polls, registering the people who you talk to on a daily basis, and having those conversations to ensure that people understand how important this really is. Whether your issue is climate change, social justice, equality for the LGBTQ, for women's rights, for gun reform, for healthcare, whatever your issue is, there is something that touches you on a personal level that your vote matters. Your vote matters. And so when you start organizing it, and you start scaling up, and you start representing not only yourself, but your whole community, that's how we create that counterbalance. That's how we can fight those dark negative forces that are trying to scheme and take this democracy and can instead have something that comes from the people, for the people, by the people. And so for me this year, I'm spending all my effort organizing, bringing people together in communities, and making sure that come this election, we march to the polls in unity, in solidarity, and make change in this country. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.